So there's a new movie out called Nosferatu, which I watched and I enjoyed. It's a well-made film. When you actually want to make movies, it's just another example of something that's forever out of reach. I mean, its budget was $50 million. Herzog had $2.5 million for his version. Coppola had $5 million for his. But as I live in Canada, I need that money for my future one-bedroom apartment. But putting these aside, what really is it? Beside the special effects, beside the named actors, beside the hype, what is it? What's its essence? Well, it's a remake of the original one, made in 1922, a film that people really seem to love and praise, even calling it one of the best ever made. But 1922, that long ago, German producers couldn't have been throwing around that much money on movies. So whatever makes a Nosferatu film good lies in history, not money. And if we can understand what made the original good, we can create something good without a crazy budget. What we're looking for lies within an art movement called German Expressionism. Don't get too caught up on the name. We're here to make something, not become the perfect film historians. It's always good to begin with some sort of a definition. So here it's defined as a reaction against the atom splitting of Impressionism, and at the same time setting itself against naturalism with its mania for recording mere facts and its paltry aim of photographing nature or daily life. In less pretentious terms, we can ask ourselves, what's the best way to represent our experience of the world? Is it to paint a picture of life as accurately as possible, down to the last detail? The expressionists would say this fails because it sacrifices the interior side of life to dull facts. They're obsessed with pre-rational ways of seeing, with ancient gods, strange visions of reality, the supernatural and mystical, the dark and divine parts of the mind. And so by studying this movement, we have a practically infinite source of visual inspiration for our shots, something that Coppola picked up on in his adaptation of Dracula. Dracula himself fitting thematically within this movement as a strange ghoul from another world who terrorizes mankind. And that's exactly what our tiny slice of the massive artistic movement, Nosferatu, is as well. Because understanding the movement is more important than any special effect we can cook up, it's worth diving into the history here, so stick with me for a second. From Nosferatu and its creator, F.N. Murnau, we can trace the influence back to Dracula by Bram Stoker, which presents the whole vampire versus man thing that Nosferatu quite directly takes from. But if we want to be more original in our version, we can go further to the 19th century French symbolists, who are the real masters of surreal and gothic horror in general. This is still a very large movement to study. It would be easier if we could focus on a single guy. Luckily, we can trace the influence on these guys back to the pioneer of this entire thing, Edgar Allan Poe. Poe was attempting to get at what we now call the problem of consciousness, the unavoidable difficulty of understanding the nature of human thoughts, perceptions, and experiences. At the core, his work is obsessed with the relationship between reality and the brain's perception of reality. While the realists were telling fireside stories which we laugh along and cry to, as if the mind were this easily understandable thing, Poe was writing about psychotics who lure their enemies into dungeons and bury them alive, distilling irrational dream energy into haunting images that will later be fuel for things like German Expressionism. That's why the symbolists admired him, that's where Gothic horror comes to life, that's where the idea behind Nosferatu truly lies. But where do we start? Well, for one thing, he meticulously systematized and shaped his ideas about writing. In this fantastic essay on composition, he lays out the process he uses to construct a story. The gist of it is that we have certain reactions we want to invoke in the reader, which Poe calls effects. We want them to feel scared, or joyous, or even to show them something about our internal world. Conveying these are the problems we face, like an equation in which we know the answer we want and need the correct variables to make it work. Every decision, from the length to the layout to the tone, down to the images, are tools one uses to achieve the desired effect. Now this is a very analytic approach to making art, but when making movies, I feel it's one appropriate to have. The best directors knew exactly what they wanted out of every shot, and on set you need certainty to be effective since you're working around a budget as well as other people's time. The effect we're going for is going to be one of horror, so everything, from the lighting to the characters to the layout of the shots, should serve that end. In addition, he has many crisp, highly readable short stories, really some of the best in the history of the form, that we can use for more direct inspiration. In particular, I found that with a few tweaks, the story called A Gold Bug matched the Nosferatu aesthetic well, was easy to visualize, and had a simple enough plot. So it provides a good framework for working in. But this is all still very abstract. Whatever German Expressionism means, we need to find out by actually watching the film. I've always found these old silent films incredibly boring, and I never understood why people rated them so highly. But after having a good reason for watching them, I found it much more engaging, and I hope that now understanding a bit where it came from gives you that as well. To me, the film is so striking because the setting is completely realistic. We have the landscape of the mountains and the narrow streets and closely packed houses of a small town. But within this realism, we have certain elements that are just crazy, like this clearly insane old man and his occult paper, and of course Nosferatu himself. Having only certain elements that seem to come from the depths of hell in an otherwise realistic world really amplifies their expressiveness, and that's the essence of the movie to me at least. For the effects, let's start with that piece of paper. It's a cool prop, linking the film to some kind of occultism. And because we did our homework, we know that this probably comes from the symbolists. Any symbolist painting would work, but I chose to copy it down directly. So we can open our toolbox of effects and add it. Noting that it costs absolutely nothing to make besides a few minutes of drawing. Then the centerpiece of the film, Nosferatu. To give Nosferatu the expressionistic effect, there was of course the iconic use of makeup, but also a lot of trick photography, like here, where the footage is clearly sped up, and also here, where Nosferatu is actually moving in stop substitutions, giving him a jerky and unsettling feeling. Then there's this transparency effect here that makes it seem as if he's coming in from another world. We've actually used stop substitutions and transparent masking before when we looked at Méliès, but here they're being used as tools to create a creepy effect that matches the horror aesthetic. We can build upon the effects we've already made for the Méliès video and tweak them slightly in our new film, which gives us another useful tool, one that is, again, completely free. We can also learn from the structure of the film itself, the first half being linear, merely following a succession of bizarre events seen from the point of view of a journeying young man. The second half being parallel intricate. No doubt influenced by the man himself, D.W. Griffith, who we covered in the last video. This is easy since we learned how to do the parallel intercut last time, so we can add it to the toolbox, getting ourselves another tool, which again costs nothing. Now by this point we have a decent amount of tools to start building our film, but there's one more thing that gives Nosferatu its distinctive look, something we haven't covered before, and maybe the most important, and that is lighting. Murnau was a big fan of what's called chiaroscuro lighting, which sounds fancy, but really it's just the contrast between light and dark. It's good for creating a brooding atmosphere, like you're staring into a long impenetrable darkness, from which a subject stands starkly out against at certain points and fades into at others. To achieve the effect, cinematographers use what's called a low-key lighting setup, which just means that the foreground is lit while the background remains dark. In the scene where Nosferatu opens the door to go after his first victim, there's a backlight that casts a shadow as he approaches the doorway until a single keyframe illuminates him as he walks through it and gazes at his victim. It's not exactly low-key lighting because of that backlight, but you still see the contrast between light and dark, of course. I'm lucky enough to live with poor interior designers, so I get these stage lights for free to work with. But you can get the effect naturally if you just keep in mind the main idea of contrasting light and dark. Planning out the lighting was a huge factor in filmmaking for Murnau, so when setting up the shoot, it's definitely what he would have spent the most time getting right. Knowing what the great filmmakers paid the most attention to helps us avoid getting bogged down on details like fancy camera tricks or the exact placement of objects, and puts our focus on what really matters, which apparently for horror films is lighting. But at the end of the day, no matter how much information we comb through or how many films we watch, nothing beats actually picking up the camera and filming.
it's right place, in its right place, in its right place, in its right place. Yesterday I woke up sucking a lemon. 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 What was that you tried to say?